life and what your days can look like, giving you some practical examples, and we can kind of talk about it based on, you know, your own schedules and see if there's something that's not working for you, and maybe we can chat it out together and see if we can figure it out for you guys. So firstly, what does fueling for performance look like? So essentially, correct fueling looks like the following. And a lot of these are things that people will only tick off a couple of them. But we want to be able to hit all of these in order to be fueling correctly. So firstly, we want to be eating regularly. So that includes meals and snacks. A lot of the athletes that I see aren't snacking regularly, and they don't think it's something they should have to be doing. But I'm telling you right now that eating regularly includes snacks for you guys, and that should be something that you're doing every day. Obviously, eating mostly nutritious foods. We chatted about that the last time I was here. So you can remember the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating with the plate model. So obviously, we want to be eating 80% from inside the plate model, and then outside of that is that 20% of the time where we might be eating foods that aren't as nutritious for our bodies, but they might be nutritious for our mind and our soul. Also listening to your body. So every single person in the room is different, and so we want to make sure that, you know, you guys are fueling according to your own needs. And fueling around training. So that includes before, during, and after, and trying to hit every single one of those. And lastly, change your fuel according to your training. So if you train more, eat more, basically. So they all seem like pretty simple concepts, but each of these I've found to be individually a difficulty for at least one of the athletes that I'm working with currently. All right, so let's just talk about them individually. So eating regularly. So like I was saying, 3 meals and snacking, I would consider 3 snacks to be a normal amount of snacking for you guys. So for a normal pattern of eating for an athlete, it would look like breakfast, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper. That's for a normal day when you're not training. And then when you are training, you might eat more around your training. So you might have a pre-training snack, a during training snack, and a post-training snack. But you still might hit all of these as well. So you can see down the bottom, we've just got an example like some scrambled eggs and a coffee, a morning tea, banana and a yogurt, a sandwich at lunch, some hummus and carrots and celery for afternoon tea snack, a nice balanced dinner with some stir fry, and then at night for supper after dinner, just some milk and some popcorn. So this is just like a basic everyday type of thing. Like I said, that doesn't actually include adding training in and around that. So I just want to make that really clear, because the amount of conversations I've had with athletes to explain that the 3 snacks is normal, it's too many to count. So I just want you guys to understand that snacking is something you should expect to do. So as I said before, 80% of the time when we're eating nutritious foods, we want to make sure that we're eating around sport, we're eating from within the plate. So if you're going to have, you know, on the day of a game or on the day of training, we're eating from within that plate. So making sure that we're getting 80% of the time really nutritious foods, and then 20% of the time we might eat from these discretionary foods down the bottom, which would be like our fun fuel. So not everything has to come from within the plate, and it's important to have a balance. But like I said, we just want to make sure that when we're around training that we're choosing from within the plate to help us with our performance at our very best. All right, so every body is different, and so people come in all different shapes and sizes, sex, gender, height, weight, everything comes into this, and genetics plays a massive role. So you might be sitting next to your teammates at lunch or dinner or some kind of event and be saying, geez, they're eating a lot, or geez, they're not eating very much. It has nothing to do with you, because your own needs are so different to theirs. Even if they're the same height as you, even if they're the same position as you, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with your own personal needs. And so you need to listen to your own body and listen to what it's telling you. So if you're, you know, finishing training and you've had your snack and you're thinking, I'm actually really starving, you should dial into that and listen to what your body's telling you, because maybe your training that day was a little bit more intense than it has been previously, and so your body's telling you that it needs a little bit more to recover. I feel like he's going to be so bored by the end of this. No, I feel bad that I can't make it more interesting for him. So again, let's match our intake to our training. So your own training is different to everybody else's. Everybody on the team has different goals. So your performance goals within your team looks different to everybody else on the team as well. You might have strength goals, you might have speed or agility goals, you might have endurance goals. Those are all your own goals. So again, your fueling might look different compared to your teammate next to you. Again, listening to your body, eat more when you're hungry. And that's a huge one. I think a lot of the time athletes tend to resist eating when they think they've had enough. And sometimes that might be the case, but actually sitting in that and having a listen to what your body's telling you and being like, all right, I'm actually really starving. Why is that? Have I maybe skipped a meal here or there? Have I done more training? Am I recovering from a game the day before? All of those signals are important for you to listen to. And so if you are hungry, then often it just means that you need to eat more food. It's pretty simple, but a lot of the time athletes tend to stop eating and think, oh no, that's enough. And then their body doesn't, get what it needs. And then that can basically increase your risk of injury or just hinder your progress in like the gym or on the court or the field. And just remember, guys, that sometimes we eat more because we feel like it, and that's okay too. So you don't always have to be doing everything exactly just so. Sometimes your mum might make your favourite meal and you just really like it and you can have more because you want to. And you don't have to have an excuse for it. You don't have to have trained for it. Sometimes you might just want to eat some more food, and that's totally fine. All right, so this is a pretty typical day of what I see. Athletes coming to me and saying, I'm really tired all the time, I'm getting sick a lot, I'm injured all the time, or I just don't really know what I'm doing and I need help. And I have a look at what they're eating day to day. So you can see this is an example of an athlete that goes to school. So it might be like an adolescent athlete or someone who goes to work, so a semi-professional or an amateur athlete. So waking up at 7 a.m, having breakfast as soon as they wake up, and then leaving for work and kind of leaving it, not really having a morning tea snack and just having a sandwich on white bread for lunch. And then afternoon rolls around, they're pretty tired, but they've got to have something because they're about to go to training. So they might have a couple pieces of fruit. Not a bad snack to have pre-training, as we talked about the last time. This is a fast digesting carbohydrate option. But you can see that it's a couple of hours before their training, and then they get to training and they do their training session, and then they get home and they have a dinner that's probably a bit disproportionate to what they actually would need. So there's a huge portion of protein on there and a half a plate of carbohydrates, but there's no veggies. And then you'll see that they go to bed at like 10 p.m. So this is a pretty standard day for what I see. So there's a couple of things that stand out. Firstly, in that they're not really snacking and their meals aren't really balanced. So we talked last time about balancing our meals out by choosing proteins and carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables. And we want our main meals to be balanced. So what we're missing is a fair bit of fuel, but particularly we're missing fuel around training. But to be honest, this is pretty standard from what I see. There's a lot of improvements that can be made. But here's another example of something else that I might see quite frequently. So this person here is more like a professional. So if we start off with this and we don't do anything about it now, by the time this athlete becomes professional, this is generally what I see. So they wake up at 10 a.m, pretty late waking time, generally as a result of being really tired and not having slept very well that night. They wake up, they don't eat. They're not really hungry, not really feeling like they, want to eat in the morning. I'm never hungry in the morning. Then they go to training and they go, oh, okay, now I'm starting to feel hungry and I have to train at 12 and I'm pretty starving, but it's too late. Now I don't want to eat anything because I don't want to feel sluggish. So I'm just going to have a banana, which is, again, not a bad snack, but that's all your body is using for this whole training session. That training session goes for a couple of hours. Then they get off the field or the court and then they head into the gym and they do a gym session, and maybe they go to the pool, they faff about with their teammates, they cool down, the coach wants to speak to them, then they end up going home. They haven't really brought anything with them because they weren't really prepared, and then they think, oh, I'm really hungry on the way home, so they stop and get Subway. Again, not the worst option that you can choose, but it's obviously pretty long after that training session. And then they'll eat that sub and then they won't have anything else until dinner. And you can see that dinner is double the portion to what we would normally recommend. because they're absolutely starving because they haven't really eaten that day. And then they might have a snack at 8 p.m. Ice cream isn't an issue. It's the portion size of the ice cream and the fact that that's kind of replacing another snack or meal that probably should have come in that day. And then you can see that they're not going to bed until about 11 p.m, which again is pretty standard based on a lot of issues with fueling in terms of sleep. It's really, really affects your sleep, and also sleep hygiene, particularly around using your phones towards bedtime, makes your brain think that it's daytime, and it makes it really difficult for you to fall asleep. So again, the reason why I'm showing you this is because this is really standard, and this is something that we can all together today work on to make it a little bit better for this particular athlete and help them perform a little bit better. All right, so one of the big questions that I get is, how can I tell if I'm fueling enough? So obviously, you know, athletes get really hungry, they want to eat all the time. Sometimes they listen to that, sometimes they don't. But generally, it sometimes can be difficult to tell if you're fueling enough. So some of the ways that you can tell if you're fueling enough, signs of adequate fueling is things like having an abundance of energy to train. So I don't mean just being able to get to training and get through training. I mean being able to get to training, be excited to train, be motivated to push yourself through that session, whatever that might be, whether it be weights, speed, endurance, all those sorts of things that come with training, skills even, and being able to push yourself to the other side of that session, knowing that you still have a little bit left in the tank. Sometimes if the coach says, get on the line, maybe you're not going to have anything else in the tank at the end of that, and that's okay. But generally, especially for things like skills sessions, we want you to have an abundance of energy. So also you might notice an increase in your speed and power and an increase in strength gains. So what that's doing is essentially showing that you're fueling for that particular session. So for example, when you come here to SRA, the coaches here have designed programs for you guys to get a specific adaptation to the training that you're doing. So in order for you to come here and actually push yourself through that session to get the strength gains or the speed and power gains that you guys have come to work for, you need to fuel for that session specifically. And so it's really important to remember that each training session that you do has a specific purpose. Sometimes it's easy to just get here and go through the motions, but if you're fueled, your brain is switched on. Our brain uses a lot of fuel, and that comes with things like focus and concentration and being able to listen to the coach when he's telling you something. It also has a lot to do with our reflexes, so reaction time, being quicker, you know, when it comes to things like passing and catching and just general speed and, you know, turning on the ball and things like that. Also, mood and motivation will be elevated when it comes to like adequate fueling. So your mood is very much affected by your fueling. And if you're not fueling well, then you might feel really tired or sluggish or just not in the mood to be around people or to come to training at all. And the last thing, like I mentioned to you guys, sleep. When you're fueling well, sleep is really deep and it's really restful. And so if you're not falling asleep easily, you're not staying asleep, or you're waking up feeling tired, those can sometimes be signs of either overtraining or underfueling, or both. So just being really aware of that. Some signs of underfueling that I see quite frequently, and ones that you guys can watch out for, is things like getting sick frequently or finding it hard to shake a cold. So if you are getting sick more than your teammates, or when you do get sick, you know, not necessarily COVID, I think you can probably all give yourselves a break when it comes to that because everyone's been responding differently. But when it comes to just the common cold, if you find it hard to shake, that can be a sign of underfueling. Also, gut troubles, so things like constipation or bloating. Often what happens when we're not eating enough is our gut starts to slow down and it won't move food through as quickly. So that's something that can be quite common for athletes, especially when they say, I don't want to be sluggish for training, which means then they don't eat, which means then they're underfueling, which makes their gut move slower. So it's kind of that vicious cycle. If you're always tired during the day, it's pretty obvious, but sometimes we're simply just tired because we need to eat more. If you have difficulty focusing on tasks, like I was saying before, your brain uses a lot of fuel, so you need to make sure that you're keeping your brain as well as your body fueled. If you have a preoccupation with food, so if you're always thinking about what am I going to eat next, What's the size of that meal? What's the biggest meal that I can get? When you go to a restaurant, what's the biggest serve on the menu? Those sorts of signs to me mean that maybe you haven't eaten enough before that particular meal, and maybe that means you're not snacking enough. And last thing, hunger. Hunger is pretty common, but excessive irritability or low mood can also be a sign. And just for your information, the consequences of frequent or chronic underfueling. So these are the ones that happen when this has been going on for a little bit too long. And I do see this in quite a few athletes that I work with. So changes in hormone levels. For women, that can be a loss of menstruation. For men, that can be a loss of morning erections. It's really normal for men to have erections in the morning. And if that amount of erections reduces in the morning, then that's a really common sign for you guys to be mindful that fueling might be inadequate. Also, bone stress injuries. So that's something that comes about quite frequently with stress fractures. You'll hear people that have stress fractures, and that's one of the first things that we look at. If someone has a fracture, where did it come from and what's fueling looking like? And then iron deficiency, really common in athletes, a lot of female athletes particularly, but also male athletes. And then also decreased growth and development. So all of these things are just what can happen if you are underfueling. So really important for you guys to be aware of that.
How often should they be looking to get their bloods done, just to test for things like that?
So it depends on, I would say for females, every 6 months if they're doing something that's quite like full on, especially if they're in a sport that's a lot of impact on the ground, so like basketball, running, those sorts of things, because you do tend to find that there's iron loss from running. Also, obviously, in menstruation. So for women, it's probably more common than in men. 6 monthly, if you have a history of iron deficiency or someone in your family has a history of iron deficiency, then it's a really good idea to get tested every 6 months to 12 months. And for men, I would say 12 months probably is pretty accurate. Unless you've gotten it done 2 or 3 times in the last few years and everything's been hunky-dory and everything feels great and everything's on the up and up. So it depends. You can talk to your doctor about it, but generally 6 to 12 months.
Which is athletes, or you guys should be getting your bloods done once or twice a year.
Yeah, and if you're feeling really tired, like honestly, one of the first things I ask, if someone's like, I'm so tired all the time, I'm like, when did you get your iron checked last? It's super common for athletes to be low in iron. Just because it's common doesn't make it normal. So we want to make sure that things like, loss of menstruation in women is a particularly common one for women to think, oh, that's, female athletes just never have their period ever. And I'm like, well, they often don't, but that doesn't mean that it's normal. So we have to make sure that we're mindful of that. All right. So now we've kind of had a look at what underfueling can look like and what accurate fueling can look like. But now I want to show you what that means in practical examples. Because generally it doesn't mean anything until we kind of look at what it can actually look like. So this is an example of an athlete who's worked with a dietitian over a prolonged period of time and added fuel slowly to get themselves to this point. So you can see that they're waking up nice and early at 7 a.m, feeling rested and ready to face the day. So they're having a nice balanced breakfast. So that's some porridge with some nuts and some fruit. And then they're going to leave for school or work at about 8 a.m. normal time. They're going to have a morning tea snack at 10 a.m, so that's only a couple of hours after they've had their original breakfast meal. And that snack has a lot of good vitamins and minerals and also a bit of protein and some good fuel there from the orange and the muesli bar. Then at lunchtime, so that's again only a few hours later, they're going to have another balanced meal. So that's a wrap with some chicken in it and some salad. They're also going to add some extra veggies on the side and going to have it with a bit of hummus, which is a really good option to choose. And then they're not going to wait too much longer. Afternoon tea is their pre-training snack. Could come earlier, depends on the person, but generally that's a pretty decent snack. And this one here can fit sort of in between here where it feels good. And this is where it's good to understand how your own body works, because for some people, a 4:30 snack with a 5:45 training might be a little bit too close. And that's okay, because you can move it back to maybe 4, maybe 3:45, whatever feels good for you and your stomach. But just remembering that, like every muscle in the body, the stomach is also a muscle, and it can be trained to tolerate food closer and closer to training if you work at it. And the reason why that's important is because when you start to, get higher up in your sport and you don't have control of your schedule, so if you're traveling, then you need to be able to be flexible. And so a lot of the time what happens to athletes that aren't flexible is that we get on the plane, we go to Adelaide to play a game, and we arrive, the plane's been delayed by an hour, which means that now we've missed lunch. And so now we've only got a couple of hours before the game. By the time we get on the bus and drive to the stadium, then there's only about an hour and a half before they play, and that's too close for them and they can't eat anything, which means now the last time they've eaten is the snack that they ate before they got on the plane, which was a really long time ago. And then by the time they get all the way through the game, it's been about 6 hours since they've eaten, which means that the fuel that they're using is literally just fumes. So we need to make sure that we can be flexible, but it's also important to choose foods that we know we can digest. And that's where training comes in, because we can practice all of this stuff on days where we train to make sure that we're really nailing it for game day. So this is a good example of a pre-training snack. You've got a little bit of protein from a yogurt, but a yogurt is a really easily digestible protein option. And then we've got obviously some good carbohydrates from a piece of bread or toast with peanut butter and some banana. Elite combination. I think I mentioned that last time. So then this person's going to training. They're absolutely killing it at training. They're feeling good. They're feeling fueled. Potentially can, in this training session, depending on what it looks like, have some Gatorade in here if they wanted to. But this was just a skills session, so they didn't necessarily need it. They got to the other side of training and they had their post-training recovery shake, which I know a lot of you guys already do. That can be a protein shake. It can be an up and go. It can just be a chalky milk, whatever you have available. It doesn't have to be milk-based. That's just an easy option. It could also be a yogurt, or it could be, a peanut butter sandwich or something like that. But we want to get something in post-training, preferably that's a high protein option. Then that person's going straight home and they're having a proper meal. So again, that's a nice balanced meal. It's got some good carbohydrates, it's got some good protein and some veggies. And then they're still going to have their supper snack, which is only an hour later. But what I like about this supper snack is that it's a dairy-based snack. So it's got a glass of milk and some of the air pop popcorn, slightly sweet, slightly salty. Anyone on that train? Yeah, exactly. It's so good. But the whole thing about dairy foods pre-sleep is that dairy foods have been shown to help us sleep better. And when you sleep is when you grow and recover, and sleep will be your biggest weapon, especially as you become more and more elite. You have to be able to sleep, and you have to be able to sleep deeply and restfully. So if you have a source of protein and dairy before you go to sleep, it can help you sleep and sleep better. So that's why that's a pretty cool snack to have, pretty easy, but it could also have been like an up and go or some yogurt or something like that. And then they go to bed nice and early at 10 p.m. and they're asleep like that, ready to wake up at 7 a.m. the next day. Cool?
How many athletes eat 6 or 7 times a day?
Does that include snacks?
Yep. Similar to that, like what was that?
Yeah. So this is another example. So this is a professional athlete who has again been working to improve their nutrition and their overall well-being around training. So they're waking up nice and early at 8 a.m. because they're feeling restful and they've had a good sleep, and they're having breakfast immediately. Again, good breakfast, balanced, it's got some good oats. Oats is obviously just an option, but eggs on toast or something is also a great option, doesn't have to be sweet. They've had a coffee as well, but this person's a little bit older, so they can have coffee. And then they're leaving for training a little bit later. So 10:45, they've got a couple of hours to kill. They can do whatever they want. They can walk the dog, they can chill, they can play, Xbox, whatever. And then they head to training and they have their pre-training snack when they arrive. But you can notice that this pre-training snack's a little bit bigger. So this person's trained their gut to tolerate a little bit more. So they've got a banana and a jam sandwich on white bread. So that's a really decent sized pre-training snack, something that's really easy and transportable for them.
Is there a reason it's white bread instead of peanuts?
Yeah, so white bread is a faster digesting carbohydrate, and so it won't sit in your gut. And so that's why usually we would choose, for general health, we would always choose a whole grain bread option. to help with fibre, and it's good for your gut health and gives you longer lasting energy over the day. But then when it comes to white bread around training, it won't sit in your gut. So for those people that are like, I can't eat close to training because I don't want to be sluggish, this is a really good choice for you. And most of the time, like honey or jam sandwiches are the easiest thing to go for, but you could go for a PB&J if you wanted to. No harm, no foul. That's up to you. Then they're going to go do their training session. So it's a little bit of a longer training session, 2 hours. So they're going to have a half a Gatorade and some water. So it could be a whole Gatorade, doesn't have to be half, but this guy only went for half. And then after training, they're just having their quick up and go. And then they're heading straight home to have their lunch. Again, a balanced lunch. Doesn't have to be that option, but could be cooked, or it could be just a sandwich or a wrap. And then they're only waiting a couple more hours before they have their afternoon tea snack, which is again got a good hit of protein. And then they're going to have their dinner at their normal time of 7:30, again a balanced meal, and their snack before bed and an early bedtime. So this is what a general day should look like in terms of the frequency of meals. So you can see that they're eating about every 2 to 3 hours, and that would be considered normal. It would also be normal for you to be hungry at all of these instances of the day. If you're eating your meals and you're still hungry, then that's something that you would look at to see whether or not that meal was adequate for you, or whether or not the types of foods that you were choosing in that meal were appropriate. So maybe you were missing a protein source, maybe there wasn't enough of that slow burning carbohydrate, and so that didn't last you very long. So you might make a swap and have something that's a little bit more adequate for you. He's doing really well. All right, that's all I have from this. But I wanted to just ask, is there anyone that has something that they wanted to, like, if they have something, think on it for a second. If there's a time of day that you have like a game or a training session that doesn't quite fit for you, and you want to be able to work out like when's the best time of day for me to eat, then we can talk about it. Yeah.
So this is more for people who might be studying. So I study from 8 a.m. to 3:30, which is a short day, and it's really just like sitting in class listening to lectures, but then I'd be home and be at training at 5 or 6 at night, and just trying to work out how to balance meals while not being quite active throughout the day, but still wanting to like eat and then be prepared for training.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a really good question, because it's a pretty common thing for a lot of amateur athletes to have. So I would say what you want to concentrate on is still eating regularly throughout the day. So we wouldn't necessarily miss any of those instances of eating. We'd still have, 3 main meals and 3 snacks, but it's how you configure those meals and what they're made of. That would probably be what you would look at. So instead of it necessarily being like really high carbohydrate snacks in the morning when you don't necessarily need that fuel until later, you might have something a little bit more balanced, a little bit more nutritious. So maybe choosing like the veggie sticks with a bit of hummus, or a bit of fruit with a bit of cheese or something like that. That's a little bit more, a bit more of a rounded snack than choosing something that's like a very high carbohydrate and quick to digest, because we don't necessarily need those in that moment. So we can look to the plate model and see where we can nourish our body, because we're still nourishing our minds as well. So think about when you're at school, if you haven't eaten for like 4 or 5 hours and your lecturer's like, does anyone know the answer? You're just like, I don't even know what you just said, because your brain is completely switched off. So you need to remember that you are still fueling your brain, and it's really important to continue doing that. The best way to do that is to continue to eat regularly, and that's also going to set you up nicely for that afternoon session. You've got to get to the other side of school and then go to training and still be able to perform. So it can be quite difficult. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any other questions?
How soon after training is that optimal window for getting in your protein?
Yeah, so the protein window is something that's debated quite a lot. It's not like a set window. It's not like if you don't meet that, it's going to completely close. But it is true that, and secondly, there is a time frame in which your body is absorbing more nutrients after a heavy workout. So if you've got like a big footy session or a heavy weight session, then your body is able to intake nutrients at a faster and more efficient rate for the first hour or so after you've finished. So when you have something like a protein shake or even a yogurt or a smoothie or something like that, your body's going to take that and use it right away and start that repair process immediately. So if you're looking to gain muscle or strength, then that can be a really important way to do that. So I would always have something prepared to have after the gym. When I first started doing weights, I only used to just bring milk in a thermos. It was like really basic, but it worked really well for me. And it doesn't have to be anything complicated, but that's why protein powders are so great, because they're really easy and convenient and they don't have to be refrigerated. You can chuck some milk in it or some water if there's no milk available. When it comes to your post-training meal, if you're doing a big session, I would still recommend that you go home and eat a proper meal within a couple of hours of doing that session, because again, what we're trying to do is continue on with that recovery process, and having a nice balanced meal will do things like replenishing the carbohydrates you've lost in that session, as well as obviously repairing and building your muscle tissue and just giving your body overall what it needs to start building back up from what you've just done. So that allows for the adaptation to that training session to start faster and easier. Does that make sense? Yeah. You have a question?
Like you were saying about having small meals before like training.
Yeah.
Is there ways that you can train your stomach to digest food slightly faster before training?
Yeah, I would say that it comes down to the types of foods that work for you, because I know that like there's certain foods that do work for some athletes and don't work for others. So for example, some of my athletes like to have an up and go before they train, and other athletes are like, if I have dairy before I run, I'm going to puke. So it depends on the person, and there's lots of other options you can choose. So things like, rice cakes or white breads or, sarkar crackers, things like that. Fruit is really good and really easily transportable. Has anyone had the new Uncle Toby's / Milo collab muesli bar? Oh my God, you guys got to get to Coles and Woolies. It's there. It's $5 a box. Apologies, but it's amazing. Highly recommend. Things like that, really simple muesli bars are really easy as well. And it is important for that food to be palatable, so something that's appetizing to you, that you're like, yes, I want to eat this food. I've even seen some of the CrossFitters get around the fruit puree pouches. Have you seen those? So it's like a pouch of fruit. It's shelf stable, so it just sits in the juice section of the supermarket, but it's just basically fruit that's been pureed, and it's pretty much just sugar, but it's also got some vitamins and minerals in it, so it's something that you can take really easily with you. So there's lots of different options to choose from. Just keeping in mind that where we can, we want to make that snack nourishing if we can. So instead of choosing just like lollies, we would also try to choose like some fruit or something that's going to give us something else as well, not just pure sugar. Does that make sense to you? So you can try things out and see what feels good for you and try to push it a little bit closer. So a lot of the time, the easiest way to tell if that snack hasn't worked for you is if you have it, either you feel really like your stomach's a bit upset and you weren't able to make it through that session because you maybe ate a little bit too close or a little bit too much. Maybe that next time you'd push it back slightly or just dial it back and have a smaller amount. Or if you get to the other side of that session and you're really hungry or tired, maybe that snack wasn't quite enough, or maybe it wasn't close enough. So in that situation, you'd push it forward a bit so it's closer to training, or you might increase the size of it slightly. So some of my athletes that have a lot of issues with eating, most of the time I feel like it's just because they refuse to try, but sometimes they just really can't eat anything. We start with half a banana or half of a jam sandwich on white bread, something really simple. Things like crumpets or English muffins are really easily digested as well. And so they start with like a half a crumpet and a half a banana. And if that feels okay for them in the time frame we did it, then we might go for a whole banana and a half a crumpet. So we just go really slowly, and eventually we get to a point where they might be having like 2 crumpets, a banana and a half a muesli bar. And that feels really good for them, and they feel like that's enough energy. But this is why, everybody's different, and every athlete likes different foods and can tolerate different foods. So that's why it's really awesome that we train all the time, because we can practice pretty much every day what's working for me and what's not. Cool? Yeah.
Like in terms of when you wake up eating breakfast and all that kind of stuff when you have training.
Yeah.
What if it's like you have like you wake up early, like 5 o'clock for like a 7 a.m. kind of workout kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in terms of like what to eat, like breakfast or like that post, like pre-workout snack, like what would you do in like those kind of situations?
Yeah, good question. Again, it's a pretty typical one for like swimmers and athletes that train really early. So again, I would be looking at if it's a 7 a.m. training session and you're waking up at 5, you've got a couple of hours to digest. So you probably can tolerate more than you think. It's just that you're not used to waking up at 5 and your mum's slapping you in the face and being like, eat this, because it's just a bit too early for you, you know what I mean? So you have to be planning it and expecting it. So when you wake up in the morning, maybe you might start with something really easy like an up and go, where it's not too hard on the stomach, pretty easy to digest, but it's got, good energy, good protein in it, and that feels okay. And then you might be able to start adding some things to that. So you might have like a single piece of toast with a bit of jam or Vegemite, whatever is good for you in the morning, and sort of going from there until you may or may not be able to tolerate any more than that, but at least you're getting something in. I have some athletes that will eat a bowl of porridge before they train an hour and a half later, and that feels really good for them and they can digest it really easily. If I tried to do that, I would die. So it just depends on the person, but I know that 2 crumpets with jam is great for me, and that feels really good. Yeah. Any other questions?
This question would be more specific for Hamish.
Yep.
So he's one of my I know he's not going to ask. So he's one of my semi-pro athletes that's trying to make an elite level.
Yep.
For his position, he needs to be 3 to 5 kilos heavier.
Yep.
What sort of he needs to eat like 4,500 to 5,000 calories a day. What are some easy tricks that he can use to hit that mark?
Yeah, so for guys who need to eat more than they feel they're able to, which is a lot of people that are trying to put on size, generally what we want to look at is the fibre content. So when we were talking about the whole grain breads or brown rice and brown pastas and those sorts of things, if you try to eat enough calories in those sorts of foods, you're going to be so heavy and sluggish all the time. And so what we want to do is actually do the reverse of what I would tell your mum, which is she should always eat those foods for health. You probably need to do the opposite and maybe sort of start to swap them out for some lower fibre options. So choosing white rice, you can eat probably 3 times the amount of white rice that you can brown rice, but it's pretty similar in calories, and so you can actually eat a lot more if you're going to have those really simple foods. It also includes things like adding like honey to things or increasing the oil that you use. Things like that can be easy ways to get more energy in, because a lot of the time when you're trying to put on size, it really does come down to simply having enough energy coming in without feeling like you want to keel over and die from being too full. Yeah, but protein definitely becomes important, but not as important as you would think. We need to get protein coming in really regularly. So every 2 to 3 hours, we need a good source of protein, but you don't need to have the sheer size of protein that people would say. So you don't need to have like a whole plate of steak. You still only need to have like a third of your plate be steak. And the carbohydrate is what really is important, because you need to be able to fuel for the weight sessions that are going to give you the muscle mass that then allows you to put on that weight. Make sense? Yeah. How are you going with it, by the way?
All right.
Yeah. It can be a slow process, for sure.
Shakes, toasted sandwiches, pretty simple options. Yeah,
definitely. And shakes are cool because you can add a lot to them without it being too filling for you. So you can hide a lot in there. You can add like the sachets of quick oats are often easier for you than rolled oats, even though they seem like they're the same. But I find that athletes can eat 3 sachets of oats where they can only eat a half a cup of rolled oats. Things like that, yeah, like I said, honey and bananas and stuff can just all be jammed in. Lots of nutrition, peanut butter, chia seeds, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Cool.
Rylie, any questions?
Yeah, there's a fair bit going on. But like I said, if we can get most of you guys to go from like one of these where we're just having like really infrequent meals and sort of back-ending all of it. Like, to be honest, guys, in Australia, it's really common for Australians to back-end all their calories to the end of the day. That's just kind of like a cultural thing where we're all like, man, I'm hungry after the day, and we eat a massive meal at dinner. For some athletes, it's important to eat a lot at dinner, especially if you're trying to put on size. But for most of us, it's an indication that we haven't fueled adequately for the rest of the day. And so we need to sort of spread that out and give ourselves enough opportunity to get it all in throughout the rest of the day when we need it. Yeah.
For someone who's allergic to peanuts,
Yeah.
like what is like a good like substitution kind of thing, like for that, like in people?
Is it just peanuts or is it all nuts?
Pretty much all nuts, yeah.
So you're wanting a substitution like on like toast or in smoothies, or what are we talking?
Or like just like eating, like an eating wise kind of thing. Or like I know in like protein bars and everything, it's like you can't really find any without like nuts.
Traces of nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is hard. And I would say, yeah, alternatives to nuts, it's going to be different in every food category. But can you have like seeds and stuff?
Yeah.
Like pepitas and sesame seeds. Tahini is probably going to become your best friend. Do you use that ever? So tahini is like the sesame seeds all ground up into a paste, same consistency as peanut butter, but they use it in all kinds of different like cooking and stuff like that. It's in hummus. It's the main ingredient in hummus, and it's delicious. Get around it. It's highly recommend, and I'm pretty sure they're making like peanut butter versions of tahini now that are like, yeah, there's like a Nutella version that's not obviously hazelnuts, stuff like that. But you're probably going to have to make friends with the health food store because they're going to have a lot more variety than your local Coles. But you'll find products that work for you, and yeah, good luck with it. Get on tahini though; that'll be your best friend. Or Biscoff. Do you like Biscoff? Have you had Biscoff before?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's another alternative that some people like. Maybe not as nutritious, but still delicious. Any other questions?
Danny, how you going with total meals today? Would you like to ask for some help with that?
Let's just put you on the spot. She's like, no.
It's like I'm aware of what I should be eating, but like it's just hard to like fit it in because I'm an ex-elite gymnast, so like the mentality around gymnastics is like eat as little as you can.
Yeah,
So like it's kind of getting out of that habit.
for sure. And that's part of one of the problems, I suppose, with aesthetic sports is that the pressure on you guys to look a specific way only compounds the pressure that we have externally from the rest of the world when it comes to athletes. People have expectations on what athletes should look like. They should look like this, and a gymnast shouldn't be too tall. They should be muscular, but not too muscular. You know, a footy player needs to be really lean and muscly, but they should never have, you know, any belly fat, or they should never have this, that, or the other. Like, people are constantly scrutinising athletes and looking at their bodies and making comments, and it can be really stressful and add a lot of pressure to you guys. And so it's definitely something that we want to be aware of. I can take an athlete that, you know, is 180 centimetres and 70 kilos and one that's 200 centimetres and 75 kilos, and there's no way that I can tell you based on how they look which of those athletes is more elite or better at their sport. It's impossible for me to know that, and it's irrelevant. So I think as athletes we need to back each other as well. Women need to be aware that it's happening to men, and men need to be aware that it's happening to women, because we need to back each other up where we can and tell people that it's not acceptable to comment on our bodies, because it makes it really difficult for people like yourself when you come out of that elite environment to understand how to eat to be, you know, a regular person as well as still performing at a different sport or something like that.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like this was never coming from trained professionals. It was just coaches that were like,
Yeah,
this information, so.
absolutely.
Just kind of adding on to that, as someone who's just building up the meals in a day, I'm finding, like you were mentioning, that bloating from eating not as much to now eating 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks. From eating 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks in a day, like
Yep.
some days it's easier and harder. Just how to balance, like what kind of meals that are easier to like train your digestive system.
Yeah, for sure. Have you heard of FODMAPs before? So FODMAPs are sugars in fruits and vegetables and grain foods, and generally there's a lot of research out there at the moment to talk about foods that are low in FODMAPs. I think for a lot of athletes, lower FODMAP foods, basically what happens when we eat these particular sugars is they ferment in the gut and cause bloating. And for some people that have irritable bowel syndrome, or just athletes in general, it can be really uncomfortable or even painful. And that's something that I see probably 30% of the clients that I see or the athletes I see are suffering from some kind of IBS symptoms. It also is really common in women around menstruation, and it really increases when it comes time for our periods. You'll notice that you start to get extra bloated or really hungry, or things don't feel right when they're not digesting properly. So there's lots of factors that, you know, play a role in that specifically, but I would advise coming and seeing me. It's the easiest way for us to work it out together. Yeah, for sure. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It's freezing in here. My hands. Thank you for coming and freezing and listening.